She handed me the bill and smirked. She had no idea the waiter was about to end her. I have been quiet for 11 years. Tonight, in front of a chandelier that cost more than my first car, I stopped being quiet. My name is Victoria. I am 73 years old. And if you had told me a decade ago that my own family would treat me like a walking credit card with a pulse, I would have laughed you out of my kitchen. But that is exactly what happened. And tonight, at a table set with white linen and crystal glasses, my daughter-in-law slid a leather bill folder across the table toward me, smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said 4 words that I will never forget. "This one's on you." She had no idea what was about to happen next. None of them did. Before I tell you how the waiter, a young man I had never met in my life, quietly turned the entire table to stone with a single sentence, "I need you to do something for me." If you believe grandmothers deserve respect and not exploitation, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because these stories only get more satisfying. And I would love to know, where are you watching this from tonight? Type your city in the comments. I read every single one. And knowing there are people all over the world sitting with me through this story means more than you know. Now let me take you back to where it all began. 11 years ago, my son brought a young woman home for Sunday dinner. She had sharp eyes and an even sharper laugh, the kind of laugh that made you want to be in on the joke, even when you weren't sure there was one. I liked her at first. I really did. She complimented my roast chicken, asked about my late husband with what seemed like genuine curiosity, and told my son, right in front of me, that she'd never met a mother-in-law she could actually get along with. I should have paid more attention to how quickly she said mother-in-law and how rarely, in the years that followed, she ever called me by my name. They married 8 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than I made in 2 years working as a school administrator. I paid for the flowers. I paid for the open bar. I told myself it was a gift, the kind any mother would give, and I didn't think twice about it. That was my first mistake. Not the gift itself, the not thinking twice. Because after the wedding, the requests didn't stop. They just got quieter, more frequent, and somehow always urgent. A car repair here. A temporary loan for a security deposit there. A birthday present for her own mother that somehow needed my credit card number, because her cards were maxed from the move. Each time it was framed as small. Each time it added up. And each time I hesitated, even for a second, I got the sigh. You know the sigh. The one that says, without a single word, that you are being difficult, that you are the problem, that a good mother-in-law wouldn't even ask questions. I kept a private ledger in the back of an old recipe book. Not because I expected repayment, I told myself I didn't, but because some quiet, stubborn part of me needed proof that I wasn't imagining things. By this year, that ledger topped $61,000. Car payments. Vacations I was never invited to enjoy but somehow financed. A kitchen renovation for a house I have visited exactly 4 times. Private school deposits for my grandson, which I gladly would have paid outright if anyone had simply asked me honestly instead of dressing it up as an emergency every single time. My son, to his credit, never asked for any of it directly. It was always her. And he always looked away when the money changed hands, the way you look away from something you know is wrong but don't have the courage to name. 3 weeks ago, my daughter-in-law called me with a voice syrupy enough to pour on pancakes. She said the family wanted to celebrate something special. My grandson's acceptance into an advanced program at his school, and that we simply had to go somewhere worthy of the occasion. She named a restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices next to the entrees, where the tablecloths are pressed so crisp they could cut paper, where the wine list is thicker than most novels. I felt a small flicker of warmth. My grandson is 11, bright as sunshine, and genuinely one of the great joys of my life. I said yes immediately, and I meant it. I told myself just this once, let it be simple. Let it be about him. I should have known better. Nothing involving her was ever simple. The night before the dinner, she called again, this time to confirm details. She mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she'd taken the liberty of inviting her parents and her sister's family too, since it was such a big celebration. 12 people at the table now, not 4. She said it so casually, like she was mentioning the weather, and I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that had become so common around her that I'd almost stopped noticing it as unusual. That sounds lovely, I said. Because what else do you say? I wore my navy dress, the one my late husband always said made me look like I owned the room instead of just visiting it. I did my hair. I put on the pearl earrings he gave me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted foolishly perhaps to feel like myself walking into that restaurant, rather than what I so often felt like around her family. A checkbook with a heartbeat. The restaurant was every bit as beautiful as promised. Soft gold lighting. A pianist in the corner playing something slow and unhurried. Servers who moved like they'd trained in ballet before switching to hospitality. My grandson ran up and hugged me the second I walked in. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself believe the whole night might actually be what it was supposed to be. Then I saw the table. 12 place settings, yes, but also 6 bottles of wine already open and breathing. An appetizer spread that hadn't been on any menu I'd seen, meaning someone had pre-ordered extensively without a word to me. And a cake box sitting on a side table that I would later learn cost more than my monthly grocery budget. My daughter-in-law greeted me with an air kiss and steered me to a seat at the far end of the table, away from my son, away from my grandson, tucked between her sister's husband and an empty chair that apparently belonged to nobody. I understood the moment I sat down that this seating arrangement was not an accident. I was positioned exactly where a person sits when they are meant to be present but not truly included. A guest of honor in name only. Dinner unfolded exactly as these dinners always do when I am the intended target. Course after course arrived that no one had asked my opinion about. Wine kept flowing, refilled by servers who had clearly been instructed to keep it coming. Her parents ordered the most expensive items on the menu without so much as glancing at the price, laughing loudly, toasting to nothing in particular except the general fact of being there. My son sat near the middle of the table, quiet, eyes occasionally flicking toward me with something that might have been guilt, though he never said a word. My grandson, at least, was radiant. He told me about his new program, about the science experiments he was excited to start, about a friend named Oliver who was in his class now. I held on to those minutes like a life raft. Whatever else happened that night, at least I got to sit near enough to hear him talk about the things that made him happy. Dessert came. The cake, the one that had been sitting on the side table like a threat, turned out to be a 5-tier confection with actual gold leaf on it, ordered, I would learn, specifically for the whole celebration, meaning not just my grandson's achievement but also, conveniently, her sister's birthday, which nobody had mentioned to me until that exact moment when a second round of happy birthday singing broke out at the table. And then the bill came. The waiter approached with a leather folder, the kind that whispers rather than announces, and set it down gently in the center of the table. There was a pause. The particular kind of pause that happens when 12 adults suddenly discover deep interest in their napkins, their phones, the artwork on the far wall, anything except the black folder sitting there like a held breath. My daughter-in-law reached for it first. She opened it, glanced at the total with a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction, and then, without a single word of preamble, slid it down the table toward me. It stopped directly in front of my plate. "This one's on you," she said, smiling. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who has done this so many times that it has stopped feeling like asking and started feeling like collecting. I looked down at the folder. I did not open it yet. I looked around the table instead, at her parents, suddenly very interested in their coffee, at her sister, smoothing her napkin with unnecessary focus, at my son, who would not meet my eyes at all, at my grandson, still blissfully unaware, humming to himself and picking gold leaf off his cake with his fingers. I opened the folder. $4,186. For a moment, the whole restaurant seemed to go very quiet in my ears, even though the pianist was still playing and the other tables were still full of their own conversations. I thought about the ledger in my recipe book. I thought about the car repairs and the security deposits and the temporary loans that were never temporary and never, ever repaid. I thought about 11 years of being the family's quiet, dependable, endlessly available bank. I was about to speak. I had a whole sentence ready, calm but firm, the kind of sentence I had rehearsed in my head 100 times in the shower and never once had the courage to say out loud, when the young waiter who had brought the bill leaned down slightly, close enough that only our end of the table could hear him clearly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite but carrying an edge of something careful, almost apologetic, "before you take care of that, I think you should know. The reservation note specifically requested that the bill be presented to the eldest woman at the table, and that it be closed out on a card ending in the digits she provided when she called to confirm the booking. We were told that was you and that you'd already agreed to it over the phone. The table went very, very still. I had not called that restaurant. I had never spoken to a single soul there before walking through the door that evening. I did not have a card on file. I had never agreed to anything. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Her face had gone the particular shade of pale that happens when a plan you assumed was airtight suddenly springs a very visible leak in front of an audience. "I'm sorry," I said to the waiter, my voice steadier than I expected, "but I never called this restaurant, and I certainly never agreed to anything. Could you tell me who did make that call?" The waiter, to his credit, did not flinch. He pulled a small notepad from his apron, the kind servers use for reservation confirmations, and read directly off it. "The call came in 9 days ago. The woman identified herself using your name and said she'd be settling the full bill for a party of 12, including a custom dessert order and 6 bottles of the reserve list. She provided a callback number in case we needed to confirm details." He read the number aloud. "It was not my number. It was my daughter-in-law's. I want you to understand something about silence. There is ordinary silence, the comfortable kind that settles over a table when everyone is simply enjoying a meal. And then there is the silence that fell over that table in that moment, thick, heavy, the kind of silence where you can practically hear 12 people running through the last 9 days of their own memories, trying to figure out how much they'd known and how much they'd chosen not to ask." Her sister's husband suddenly found his water glass fascinating. Her mother's smile had frozen into something brittle and uncomfortable. My son finally looked up, and the expression on his face was not confusion, it was recognition, the look of a man realizing all at once that he had known something was wrong and had simply chosen, for years, not to look directly at it. "You called and used my name," I said quietly to my daughter-in-law. I was not shouting. I did not need to shout. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that cuts the deepest, because it forces everyone else to lean in and actually listen. "You told them I agreed to pay for a 5-tier gold leaf cake and 6 bottles of reserve wine and a dinner for 12 people, most of whom I did not even know were coming until the night before. You used my name like it was your own personal signature." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out at first. Then finally, in a voice much smaller than the one she'd used to slide that folder across the table, I figured you'd say yes anyway. You always say yes." And there it was. The truest sentence she had spoken all night, said not as an apology but as a simple statement of fact, because in her mind it was a fact. I always said yes. For 11 years I had always said yes, and somewhere along the way my agreement had stopped being something she asked for and had become something she simply assumed, the way you assume the sun will rise or the mail will arrive on schedule. "Not tonight," I said. I closed the folder. I did not touch my purse. I did not reach for a card. I simply set the folder back down in the center of the table, exactly where it had first landed, and slid it toward her, the same way she had slid it toward me minutes before. "You made the reservation," I said. "You made the call. You put my name on a bill I never agreed to. I think it's only fair that the bill goes to the person who actually ordered all of it." I wish I could tell you there was a dramatic explosion, plates crashing, voices raised to the rafters. There wasn't. What happened instead was quieter and, in its own way, far more devastating for her. Her parents, who had been so eager to order the most expensive dishes on the menu, suddenly discovered they had left their good card at home and could only offer $60 in cash between the two of them. Her sister's family suddenly remembered a prior commitment and needed to leave immediately, mumbling something about a babysitter. My son sat frozen for a long moment, and then he did something that genuinely surprised me. He reached into his own wallet, pulled out his card and said, "I'll cover my half. She can cover the rest since she planned it." It was not a grand gesture. It was not an apology, not really, not yet. That would come later, in a much quieter conversation in my kitchen a few days after, one where he finally admitted he'd known for years how much his wife leaned on me and had told himself it was fine because I never complained. But in that moment at that table, it was the first time in a very long while that I saw him choose to stand somewhere other than beside her exploitation. My daughter-in-law sat there, the folder in front of her, her face cycling through several shades of humiliation as she realized that every single person at the table who had happily eaten gold leaf cake and sipped reserve wine on my presumed generosity had, in the span of about 90 seconds, quietly disappeared or deflected. The waiter, who had started this entire unraveling with one polite, careful sentence, simply refilled my water glass, gave me the smallest, most respectful nod I have ever received from a stranger, and stepped away to let the family sort itself out. My grandson, still blissfully young enough to be untouched by all of it, looked up from his cake and asked, "Grandma, are we still doing ice cream after this?" I told him, "Yes, sweetheart, we absolutely were. Because whatever else happened at that table, that boy deserved his ice cream, and he deserved a grandmother who didn't let the ugliness of adults ruin the one part of the night that was actually purely about him." I paid for exactly one thing that night: my own meal and my grandson's ice cream on the way home. Nothing else. For the first time in 11 years, I let a bill sit exactly where it belonged, in front of the person who had actually created it. The days since then have been quieter than I expected. My daughter-in-law has not called. My son has called twice, once to apologize in a way that felt genuine and a little overdue, and once just to check in, which felt like something new between us, something honest. I don't know exactly how things will unfold from here. Families are complicated, and 11 years of patterns don't unravel in a single dinner, no matter how satisfying that dinner turns out to be. But I know this: I closed that recipe book ledger for good that night. Not because the debt disappeared, but because I finally understood that keeping score had never been about the money. It had been about waiting for someone else to notice what I had been quietly carrying. And it took a stranger, a young waiter with a notepad and a sense of fairness that had nothing to do with me personally, to say the one sentence that gave me permission to finally put that weight down myself. I am 73 years old. I raised my son. I buried my husband. I have given generously and gladly to the people I love for my entire life, and I will keep doing that because that is who I am. But generosity is a gift, not a subscription someone else gets to auto-renew on my behalf without asking. There is a difference between being kind and being used, and for 11 years, I let those two things blur together because I was afraid that setting a boundary would look like stopping love altogether. Doesn't. I learned that at a table with white linen and crystal glasses, surrounded by people who ate well that night and left with far less than they expected. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the person quietly footing the bill for people who never once said thank you, I want you to know it is never too late to slide that folder back across the table. Give this video a like if you believe kindness should never be mistaken for obligation. Subscribe for more stories like this one because there are many more where this came from. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I read every comment, and I would love to know whose evening I'm sharing this with. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.